So I don't plan on keeping as long. We're going through Genesis 5, and one of the bigger points we see is that Lamech, the person in Genesis 4, who was very boastful of his murder, is the father of Noah. Noah will be the only survivor for the greatest catastrophe to happen to mankind, and that is the flood. So, but some important understandings for Genesis 5. Genesis 5 reads simply like a genealogy, which it somewhat is. However, genealogies, one, are very important. They're good record keeping, and they create a historicity that can be followed. And especially with archaeological digs and sites, this is a great tool to connect historical events to historical places and gather historical times and data. So genealogies are important. They might not be the most interesting reading to people, but they are very important. However, the biggest question that comes out of Genesis 5 is, how could everybody live so long? It doesn't make any sense. How could they survive to literally hundreds and hundreds of years? Well, it's actually quite simple. The science is a little more sound than you'd imagine. It's just something we don't get to experience today. So, but early man would have had extremely less genetic mutation than we have today. Now we have a complete level of mutation with complex diseases and very, very common trait differences between genetic codes. This wouldn't have existed in earlier man. This would have been a far slower process. And there is one other theory that I'm actually going to cover in an entirely different video, just because I feel like it deserves its own kind of shout out to, could it be or could it not be? But disease, far less common. Genetic mutation, far less common. And ultimately, we don't know what the pre-flood world was like. We don't actually know what the land looked as. We don't know how much, radiation protection from the ozone was present. We don't exactly know all of the extensive of damage and landscape changing that the flood had done. We don't even know what the continents looked like. We simply don't know. We're not even sure what the sea level pre-flood would have been. We have no idea. So they could have easily lived a significantly longer portion of time than we see today, simply because the earth was different. It was just a very different place. There's so many unknowns, so many variables we don't have answers to. But the biggest two ideas on how they could live so long is because they were a lot more genetically pure. Disease was something very uncommon, and you had to constantly use your body. This is the classic, phrase. It's a bit cliche these days, but you don't, if you don't use it, you lose it. They had to use their bodies all the time. Pardon me. They had to use their bodies all the time. They had to completely work. There was zero convenience afforded to them. It was a completely manual labor plant, and that was consistent through history for a long, long time. Conveniences were very slow coming. Technology always expedites the process. However, it takes a long time to get to where we are now. The conveniences we have wouldn't even be conceivable to them. So it was just in a completely different existence. So before you check Genesis 5 and say, oh, that must be some sort of mythology or some sort of weird numbers thing, or maybe numerology holds more weight than we thought. It doesn't. It's simply the fact that their world was significantly different than our world. We simply don't know. So we just kind of have to leave it as they lived for that length of time. It still makes sense. You have to go a little bit on faith and understand that we don't know what a pre-flood Earth was like. We do know what a post-flood Earth is like, and we know the issues we all face today. But even if you look at significant historical records, certain diseases break out, and all of a sudden we see massive periods of time where diseases don't seem to occur in the population. And then one breaks out, and it breaks out everywhere, and then back up. It's just gone again, temporarily, sadly. But disease is, of course, something we deal with on the constant today. They didn't deal with that back then. They were just a different people in a different world in a different time. So that's pretty much all I have for this episode. I know it's actually quite short, but that I feel is the importance to take away from Genesis 5 is to understand that it was a different people, and to understand the genealogy that led to Noah, the second descendant that we are all related to. So I will see you guys in the next one.